Good morning, Team Propane. Let me just double check that I have sent this to the right group and I've not gone to the public Facebook page here. How's everyone doing? I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to jump on. Cool, it's the correct group. Otherwise, it's just being posted to like the eBay Facebook group or something. That would be a bit of a disaster. Right, so today, as you can tell, I'm 12 again, just shaved, and we are talking about relationships with food and binging. So thank you very much, guys, for posting some of your thoughts on this. Really appreciate it. I know this was the form that we posted a few weeks ago, asking for your insights and struggles with binging, with food, with diet mindset, and a lot of you were very candid with your responses, and I really appreciate that. It's definitely helped shape this series of modules. Actually, the amount of stuff in this topic is too large to cover in one module, so I'm going to cover today just kind of the intro and the main limiting beliefs that we have, and then over the next few weeks we're going to cover strategies to tackle it all. So give me a shout if this is something that you struggle with. Post in the comments as we go along. Obviously, anything that needs clarifying, let me know. So here we go. Right. Relationships with food. So we're going to cover the main struggles that you guys filled out in the survey, the main problems that people tend to run into, and also the beliefs that come about as a result. And finally, the questions that were coming up as part of these struggles, and also what you can do as a takeaway. Not intro, takeaway. I can't type today. There we are. Right, so the reason that we're doing this is to give you a walk through the minds of propane athletes and realise that really we're all in the same boat. We all have these kind of feelings, these ruminations, and these thoughts about dieting, particularly as we start to get leaner. They really get amplified and things can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. So we want to become very clear on the sticking points as step one. And this is really critically important, because if we don't know where we're going, then how can we get there? And the more that we shine the light of consciousness onto these kind of darker sides of ourselves, the more we can tackle them head on, and then eventually eliminate them as obstacles and start moving towards success in diet and training and otherwise as well. So why actually fight this battle in the first place? Well, the key thing, first of all, is just growth. Obviously, if the more demons that you can tackle and completely triumph against, then the more you will grow physically, spiritually, and mentally. So there is a deeper tone to all of this, but really, in terms of nailing your physique, it would be better to completely deal with those demons and be able to stroll through the rest of your life without having to constantly battle them. So it is worth properly identifying them and going ahead, which I'm sure you're already convinced of. We also talk a lot about getting lean once and for all, so that it's no longer something that's pulling you back, especially when you're trying to gain muscle and you're feeling like if you were to eat a surplus, it would send your body fat over a level that you're happy with, and you may already kind of just be at that level, and so you end up spinning your wheels for a long time. So we want to get that devil off your shoulder. Also, finally, what is the point in taking care of a body that you hate? I can't remember who said this, but I thought that was a really wise thing to say. So we want to cultivate self-love, and that's both inside out, so generating this causeless love for ourselves through some of the strategies that we'll cover, and eliminating some of that social conditioning that we've taken on throughout our lives and we've imprinted on ourselves that causes us to binge or to become very food obsessed, or to punish ourselves with food in one way or another. And also we want to use the outside-in approach, which is simply getting the results so that you can prove to yourself that you can do it and move forward with your physique goals. And then next week, and probably over the next few weeks actually, because I think the topic is too big, we're going to cover recommendations. So I'll split it up. It'll either be 3 or 4 modules. How does that sound, everyone? Got 3 people watching. Right, so some of the ideas that you guys came up with, and as I say, like, really insightful stuff here. So good job on reflecting so deeply on these things. So things like when I get depressed, things exacerbate for me. Food and I are not the best friends. I have a love-hate relationship with food. Food is feeling, not nourishment. Evenings are when I get lazy and cram something in that doesn't fit my macros. So, as we get decision fatigue throughout the day, we tend to just eat something just to fill our stomach and not have to worry about it. All of these things, I'm sure you're already seeing solutions in these, but it's great to get them down on paper. For example, the meal prep and being able to minimize that friction, which is something that Joe is going to do a module on soon. The voice of my past eating disorder is always there. So that's something that, even if you've managed to overcome an eating disorder, sometimes the voice can lay there dormant, and in moments of weakness it comes back out, especially when we're stressed, either generally stressed with work and life, or stressed in terms of being in a consistent calorie deficit, which is definitely a stress. Food and I, hard struggle. I'm a comfort eater. I eat to deal with stress, or going through long binge and starve cycles, as well as staying super strict to avoid binges. And what happens there is that you can end up getting so highly strung and so militant on yourself that if something does slip, it's actually quite dangerous, because it can be pretty much of a catastrophic crash after that. Tad and Peter, hey guys. So a couple more specific insights. This is all anonymized, obviously. One person said, the less often I eat, the easier, as appetite often comes with the first bite. So reducing meal frequency tends to help this person, and modified fasting saves a lot of the mental energy, and it eliminates the number of cycles that you have to go through of, should I eat food, yes or no? If yes, okay, what food? And then that opens up a potential for some dodgy decisions. So if we can minimize that, then the number of potential times to trip up drops. Someone's responded saying, this all sounds very familiar, and the weekend accelerator approach, which is an approach that we had it's in module 20, and you may have seen it already, which is that you have 2 break glass in case of emergency days over a 2-week period, and you average out the calories over those 2 weeks. But the downside of that is that if your calories are already very low as your baseline, it can make things a little bit too low. So an alternative would be 1 or 2 fasting days or very low calorie days, much similar to the 28-day shred, to be preferable in dealing with a blowout. So because the fasts will allow you to very quickly restore or bring that surplus that you might have had from a blowout the day before back into line, it means that you've quickly solved the problem. So that is one approach that you can try, but which I'll cover a bit later, because the risk there is you have to match this to your mindset. Sometimes people find that if they are the kind of person to beat themselves up, then going for a fast can often turn into kind of a self-punishment thing, and we don't want to use that too much. So a very simple way to avoid that would be to simply have a cap on how many fast days you're going to do throughout the week, and use them as the break glass in case of emergency days. Relying too much on very high volume, high calorie foods while cutting will often make you feel very mechanically full, but the problem is sometimes you can get used to that, and then if you go out for a meal in a restaurant and you're not stuffed to the hilt, you may not feel fully satisfied. So one way around that is actually to have a big volume food meal before you go out. So protein fluff, or the zero noodles, lots of veggies, or to use high volume food sparingly. So again, this is all pretty individual, and we need to experiment ourselves. Someone said there's a lot of times where I would go out and or have a lot of volume and feel stuffed but not actually satisfied, compared to going to a fancy restaurant where there are you get a tiny plate with a little bit of food in the middle and the sauce all around the outside, but you come away feeling satisfied because it was good food and it felt decadent. So these are all things to bear in mind when we are choosing our food choices. The traffic light system. This is another one of our ridiculously named systems, but this is where throughout the day you would mark yourself with a green, a yellow or a red day based on whether you hit your targets, and you can set those targets that are customizable, all covered in Module 3. And someone's asked, how can you avoid this becoming counterproductive of thinking, if I had a red day, oh, like I've screwed it up, so I may as well just completely blow out. And this is really common. This is the I've had a slice of cake, fuck it, I'll eat the whole cake mentality. And this is also ties in very much with the idea of flexible dieting. If we're doing IIFYM approach and you just feel like you can eat anything, yes, it gives you flexibility, but at the same time you lose the rigidity and the mechanical nature of eating, which when taken to the extreme, that's pretty bad. But if you are completely freeform all the time, there's so much choice and so many decisions that you can make every day, and it's infinite, that can fatigue you in itself. Has anyone experienced that? Joe, hello. Yeah, so the wins and losses with traffic lights, you can set it so that it's incremental, and you could then change the thresholds of your yellow days or your red days so that it means that if you hit a red day, it's gone quite over, rather than I'll discuss that later, because I'm gonna confuse you guys without the context, and also confuse myself. Yeah, and with all of these things, these are approaches that you can try, see if they match your mindset. If they don't, then stop. There's no need to do them. Negative mind game. I often feel bad about myself when I go over my weekly calorie targets, but I'm losing sight of the fact that my calorie intake is still way lower than when I started with propane, and objectively everything else was a good week. This is also really common, and quite often I'll get a report from a client being like, "Oh, Yusuf, had such a shit week. Everything's gone terribly. I'm so embarrassed, whatever." But you look at the numbers, and actually their weight is down 0.7%, and their calories weren't really that much over, and they still hit their training. So it's important to look at the outcomes, look at the lag indicators, which is your weight movement, how your photos are looking, and so on. And often that can be the best way to detach from this narrative that we tell ourselves that the week's gone terribly. Often as well, if we can do that enough, then we just become very numbers focused on the outcomes. Don't beat ourselves up about the inputs, and let things then adjust over the longer period. So that all requires that you've dealt with some of the stuff, some of the thoughts and ruminations that are creating these feelings. Sorry, it's too early in the morning. So if we can deal with the root causes of beating ourselves up, then that whole cycle stops, is what I'm trying to say. And we also free up some mental RAM, so the mental space essentially for the technophobes, especially when we realise that, so someone's written, when you realise that nobody else gives a shit or notices whether you are 15% body fat or 10%, or whether you hit your macros or you didn't, and unless you're walking around semi/balls naked all the time, a week of looking puffy doesn't make a difference to anyone else but yourself. And this even goes for if you're on holiday on the beach. Like, if you've been lifting for a year or 2 years, you're instantly going to look good. You're going to look like someone who lifts. And whether you are 15 weeks into a diet or in an off season, to you it makes a world of difference, because that's the extremes of where you are used to being. But as far as anyone else is concerned, some people might not even be able to tell the difference. Like, as far as they are concerned, you're just a muscly guy or a muscly girl, and that's it. So hopefully that's some food for thought. Those are some of the struggles that people have had with binging, with relationships with food. And we're going to go on to the key problems here, which tend to be preparing food that balances social situations. So that's a big one. Obviously we cover that in one of the modules. We've got the guilt and the temptation, feeling deprived all the time when dieting. And again, this comes back to that double-edged sword of, do I go for maximum flexibility or do I go for a rigid meal plan? And there really are pros and cons to both. And I wish I could give a clear-cut answer of like, this is what you need to do, but it depends on how you feel about rigidity and structure. If you're the kind of person that gets comfort from it, then actually maybe a flexible dieting approach isn't what you need. Cynthia says, this webinar feels like a one-to-one counselling session because 90% of the quotes are mine. Well, you just de-anonymized yourself there, but I wouldn't say who's a who's. Feeling out of control with cravings, especially for those who have a propensity to binge, once a little bit of that mindset kicks in, often from, say, hitting a red day or going for a food that you realize is kind of dangerous. For some people it's things like cereal, and it's for me as well. Cereal is just a dangerous food because you could pound a box of it without really thinking, and once you've done that, the floodgates open. So sugar addiction as well, similar. Hitting macros when you haven't moved enough and feeling like you need to earn your right to eat. That is a big one, and especially when you've been sedentary that day, it's very easy to rationalise your way out of hitting those targets. But we need to remember that if you don't hit the targets every week or every day in the week, then the data is going to be skewed, and we don't know that when you're making a decision at the end of that week or the end of 2 weeks based on how your weight has moved, is that because of the targets or is that because of the little adjustments that we've made midweek? Having a family with disordered eating, this is a real difficulty, partly because you have to ostensibly be seen as not eating in a disordered way for their sake, and also there's a sense of guilt, there's a sense of I don't want to set them off again, or I don't want to I don't want to get into the same place, and so that will always throw up challenges. Dealing with straight up willpower as well, and if you've seen the habits module, we can see that willpower is a finite and limited resource, and it's something that we need to maybe conserve and instead put the structures in place into our life, establish some systems so that we're not having to fall back onto willpower. Not being able to have one piece of cake, very true, and also being stuck in the diet mentality. And I made this graph just because I thought this is exactly what you see on Instagram. And if you have an Instagram account, I'm sure you will have spotted this, that you start to get people who, when they talk about their prep, they start making their food more and more aesthetic and posting more and more frequently until they're basically photographing every meal that they eat, and they've spent clearly half an hour crafting it and garnishing it with berries and like a drizzle and stuff for something that's just going to be eaten in 2 minutes. And it's really a reflection of the mental state that you're in when you're dieting. So yeah, having set calories can be this double-edged sword as well, because what ends up happening is you think, well, I've got to eat up to these calories whether I'm hungry or not, and over time, if we just eat to targets and ignore hunger, then we learn to kind of override our hunger signals, and that can cause us to be a bit disconnected from whether we are hungry or not and what our body's telling us compared to the targets. So the way around that is, so think, what is the thing that you can change about that? If you're hitting a target and you have a level of fullness that's out of your control, the thing that you can control is the volume of that food, and then you can match that to how hungry you are. If your target's 2,000 calories and you're stuffed at 1,500, very unusual, but if that was the case, then you need to drop the volume of the food. You need more calorie-dense stuff. If the opposite happens, you've eaten 1,900 and you've got 100 calories left and you're still ravenous, then maybe it's time to invest in some zero-calorie noodles and a bunch of cauliflower. So simple stuff, but easily overlooked, and then that allows us at least to stay a bit more in tune with what our body is telling us. Carb night. Anyone done carb night? This is the cyclical ketogenic diet where you have 5 days of, or 7 days of zero carbs, and then one night of absolute debauchery. The problem there, again, is that we start to put carbs on a pedestal, we elevate it, and we think, that is the night where I'm going to go mental, and very quickly you sort of go into this, again, binge starve mentality, and once you're off the diet, carbs still have this kind of allure, and you associate it with the kind of the cocaine-like high that you get. And I'm not even kidding. You genuinely, if you've been on low carb for long enough and then you have a big refeed, you're so sensitized to that serotonin surge that you get from eating a bunch of carbs that you just feel genuinely on a high for the whole night. So that's something that if we start to associate strongly, again, can throw us into a bit of a spin with food relationships. Fruit juices, this is a big one as well. Not satiating, very hunger stimulating, and can very quickly eat into our calories and our carbs allowance. Finally, we have the healthy one. So being perceived as the one that is always eating XYZ, and what happens then is you end up getting typecast, and if you break that mold, it makes people uncomfortable, and so you either continue to act in the way that people expect, or if you don't, people start giving you shit about it, which is crazy because they wouldn't give another friend who doesn't train and doesn't diet any grief for eating a pizza, but as soon as you do, it's like, oh, but aren't you supposed to be training? Like, you're the one who... And then you get all that, and then instantly that, again, creates an association. Specifically, the way around that one is covered in a video a couple of weeks ago, which is called How Not to Be That Guy. And again, talking about how to not be perceived as the one that is always putting all their eggs into the fitness basket. So check that out if you're interested in more of that. Any questions so far, guys? Hopefully this is useful. I realise it's not applicable so far. This is all the main struggles. As I say, we want to get clear on this first before we start getting into the specific recommendations, because it is going to be very individualised. We need to get clear on where we're at right now, what our struggles are, before we can move forward. So some of the main beliefs, again, I've had some of these, particularly this one actually, being scared to eat more when gaining muscle in case I undo work when dieting. And it's completely irrational, but we all get this, we're all in the same boat. Carbs are bad. Again, after a cyclical ketogenic diet, very easily done. Food brings me joy. The same thing, especially when you associate it neurochemically with that, or if we get into the cycle of comfort eating when we're upset. I still have time to get my act together. That's a common one. The delaying responsibility. Same as what I'm doing right now with my exams. It's like 2 weeks away, and I'm convincing myself that I can do it later. So very easily done with food as well. I can't get away with eating that many calories, and that's often not even based on data. We get that so much because we have this, as you may have seen, we have a free calculator on the website for macros, and very often, like probably multiple times a week, we'll get people fill in the calculator and respond saying, these macros seem way too high for me, and you're like, okay, how do you know? Like, have you got data that shows otherwise? And they go, no, but it just looks way too much. And you're like, well, all that you're saying there is you have an emotional reaction to the number on a screen with no data to support that. And so what happens is they end up under-eating consistently out of fear. But it may be that if they actually stuck to those numbers for some time, they would then either not lose weight and it would change their opinion, or they would maybe they were correct and maybe they would gain weight, but they would have a quantified reason for believing that now. They would actually have some evidence for it. Eamon's just joined. Hello, Eamon. So I'll have to eat the whole container. also a big one, and it's a big predictor of obesity. If you give someone a plate of food, the ones who will just eat what's on the plate are generally more likely to be obese compared to the ones who just stop when they're full. And again, this comes down to overriding our sense of fullness by putting politeness on top. You know, if you're given a plate of food and you think, oh, well, I have to eat it now, and especially if you're from an Eastern kind of cultural background, same with Egyptian families, which is where my family are from, if you don't eat your whole plate, you're considered rude, or it's like an insult to the host. Has anyone been to family dinners like that? And then if you finish your plate, they'll pile on more and more. And you may be eating to the point way beyond where you're stuffed, but you're thinking, I have to be polite here. And what we're doing there over time is overriding our intrinsic sense of, I'm full, I can't eat anymore, and we're losing how in tune we are with food. I won't be able to stop. Again, that comes down to the same thing of overriding, or the opposite, where we have one of something and it opens up the floodgates. Things like bread makes me sluggish may or may not be true, but the only way to really know for sure is, and it's dweeby as hell, but rate your energy levels out of 10 before and after eating the bread or the trigger food, and see what happens. So the questions that have come up as a result of these: how to get back on the wagon after a big binge, how to break the cycle, coping mechanisms, how to change the actual behaviours and thoughts that are driving this, how to get out of the black and white thinking, what to do when you're in the middle of a binge, when you're finding yourself there and the food is piling in and we feel like we're being possessed, how to get out of the self-judging and the suffering that we have, what to do about salt and weight bumps after a big meal. So again, that's one that if you have a weight bump after eating a big meal and you know that it's down to salt and fluid, that's something that we need to just log it down, but don't give it more weight than it's worth, pardon the pun. What's the root cause of binging, psychological and physiological? That's something we'll explore over the next few weeks. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Can you become fully free of this? And also, can you have it both? Can you still have fat loss goals and still hit your physique targets without being ruled by it? And I believe that you can. So, and I'll show you guys some of the insights and things that people have had, and the success stories that some people have managed to move through and achieve their physique goals while being free of the mental torture. So, has anybody struggled with any of them? And any one of those things resonate with you particularly? Pete Cohen says, if the salt shaker explodes into the regular meal, don't eat it like a fool. Yeah, heard about that. It's not great. But then you think, I've made it now, I've got to finish it. So yeah, the takeaway points, and I've been hilarious here and included a picture of a takeaway. Which one of these resonates with you the most? So have a look at the questions, the struggles, the beliefs. I'll send around the cheat sheet as well so you can take a look at it in more detail. And try to dial in specifically where your sticking point is. Try and do a brain dump. On a bit of paper, usually handwriting is more candid. Write down your specific struggles. Try and get into the headspace of where you are when you last had a binge, or when you last were feeling out of control with food. And when you do that, try and put yourself back in that position and explore where you feel it in your body when that situation comes up. Quite often it's in our stomach or our chest, but it could be up in your neck, it could be in your shoulders. And then explore, what's the narrative? What are the stories that we tell ourselves? And if you can get these down on paper, they don't seem so big and so overwhelming anymore, because you've nailed them, you've isolated them, and you've got them down on paper. So we can then look at what is the cue, the habit, and the reward. What are the specific behaviours that come up after the narrative and the feeling? Notice this is split into feeling, thoughts, and action. And once we've done that, we've got a very strong handle on it, and then we can move to the next stage, which is the recommendations, the application of how to move forward with this stuff. Alright guys, so that's it for this week. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to hang around for a couple of minutes for any questions, any thoughts. This picture is one that I like to use a lot because it's so accurate. Where, see the donuts and the sweet beer and stuff like that, those sections of your brain just seem to get bigger and bigger the deeper into a diet you get, until everything else is kind of squashed into the corner. And if you've been on an extended diet and got to low levels of body fat before, you'll know that your other kind of primal urges, things like sex and sleep and the rest of it, just pale in comparison to this big pulsing desire for food. And that's the way that the brain has been designed, but it's not nice, and it's something that we do have to tackle, especially if we already have underlying faulty beliefs and emotions around food. They're just going to get amplified. Alright, I'm guessing there's no questions, and radio silence, so if you do have anything, or if you think of anything after the call's done, post in the comments and we'll get to it next week. Alright guys, speak to you soon.